personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds, and this is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know right now. Today I have a very special guest on the show, Dimitri Sirota, who is the CEO of BigID. BigID is an actionable data intelligence platform. They like to say data management reimagined. BigID has had some huge accolades, lots of awards, a couple of mentions in the press, Forbes Cloud 100 Award, the World Economic Forum Technology Pioneer Award, Gartner Cool Vendor Award, Business Insider Hot Cybersecurity Startups, and many, many more. Very happy to have Dimitri here on the show. Hello.
Hello.
First of all, I can tell you that I was very excited to see the product come on the market many years ago, and people have asked me about it. Like, I get calls from, private equity, VC, all types of people. Tons of people ask me about the product, and I have raved about it for many years. So I've been really happy to see how well the product is done in the marketplace and all the accolades that you get. I think it's wonderful.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, no, we take great pride in building something we think is highly differentiated. And I hope you say nice things about us, or you will going forward.
Absolutely. I'm actually have the pleasure to collaborate with you all. So I'm really happy to be able to do that as well. Tell me about the problem that BigID is solving. So when you came on the marketplace, what was the gap that you felt that you were filling?
Sure. So I think, it's evolved a little bit since, so we've been in the market now for about 3 years selling product. And when we first started, which is now 5 years ago, we thought that there was a gap in the way privacy was conducted. Privacy historically was viewed very much as a problem of process as opposed to a problem of product. It was predicated on this notion of recollecting where data resided as opposed to actually knowing where data resided. So data recollection versus data records, I like to sometimes say. And we felt that with GDPR over the horizon, we started in 2016 and later, California and now Virginia and other regulations internationally. Privacy at its heart is really about kind of providing data transparency, data integrity, and there was no way of doing that so long as you basically kept it separate from the data. So long as privacy was really more something done by kind of the legal team, more the compliance team, as a GRC thing done through surveys versus scans, it would never kind of deliver on its vision of providing true transparency and trust and choice to customers. And so we felt there needed to be something to bridge that gap. And so we developed BigID, which had the big idea of doing a data up privacy solution, starting with the data that you have to help organizations understand where do they have data on individuals so they can solve some of the privacy requirements around data rights, record processing activity, privacy impact assessments. But rather than beginning with surveys and questionnaires that rely on people's recollections, which are fallible, right? I personally rarely remember where I put my sunglasses or car keys. Well, that means that most people probably don't have a perfect recollection of where they put their data. And a part of the aim of GDPR is to, again, provide trust and transparency and choice. You needed something better. And so that was the genesis. And that's kind of where we got our start. And we solved for this problem of a very hard problem of saying, look, a company has a very large data estate. And for the better part of the 2010s and 2000s, all they cared about is grabbing as much data as they could. And now for the first time, they needed to be able to separate that data. They need to be able to figure out, where do I have Dimitri's data? And only Dimitri's data, whether it's my credit card, social security, or even my IP address or cookie or session key or clickstream. I need to be able to figure out across my data estate, where is Dimitri's data? And nobody had ever done that. And it kind of boggles the mind a little bit. And I'll use one analogy before I pause and let you ask another question. If you think about the banking world, right? When you go deposit a check, and I realize most people do it electronically or automatically today, but there was a time for the older people, for the Gen Zers on your in your audience, or Gen Xers rather in your audience, you would go to a bank, deposit a check, and there was an expectation that the bank would keep a record of that. They would know how much you deposited, because if you turn around and say, I want to withdraw a portion of it or maybe the whole thing, there's an accounting. They have an accounting of your deposit. Well, today, data is the currency for the digital enterprise, for commerce and communication and collaboration, right? We saw that under COVID. We all just interacted across data. And yet, unlike currency in the bank, there is no accounting for what you deposited, for what data is yours. And without that kind of accounting, how do you provide accountability with the data? And thus we got BigID.
Yeah. Also, over the years, I've had opportunity to interview legal teams and also and corporations, and then also their IT folks. Because a lot of times when I'm working with them, we need to know exactly where data is, where certain things are. And I've always been surprised by how different these two groups perceive where things are and how they're not on the same page. So being able to have some empirical evidence, which is the actual data, the actual scans themselves, I think helps bridge that gap, don't you think?
Yeah, 100%. Look, and again, the example I give is that we don't believe that, people don't accurately recall where they put their car keys, right? So you have all these kind of helper devices to track your car keys. And yet we're completely fine with relying on recollections for people recalling what data they put where. And think about the number of data stores that companies have, and not one or two, but hundreds of petabytes of data volume. And yet the privacy world is this other era where you can just ask questionnaires and so forth. And look, it's obviously a stopgap, but ultimately, if you truly want to provide accountability, you need to be able to account for the data. And thankfully, data science, machine learning has advanced to the stage where it is possible to separate my data from yours. One of the analogies people talk about incorrectly, in my opinion, is that data is the new oil. And they use that analogy because data fuels the modern digital enterprise, right? It's the thing that feeds it. But here's the difference between oil and data. 2 buckets of Western crude oil are the same, right? They look the same, they smell the same, they have the same viscosity, whereas your data and my data are different. And at the end of the day, to provide that transparency and trust, you need to be able to provide me my data, not your data, right? So data, even though it's commingled in your Hadoop and Cloudera and S3 and Redshift and EMR, your data and my data are actually different things. And so there needs to be novel approaches, which is what BigID has developed, to be able to look across the data and tell people concretely, this is what you have, and this is whose you have. So it's that solving that kind of dual problem of what and who.
Yeah. I don't like the data is the new oil analogy. I like to say insight is the new oil, because if you can't get insight, the data doesn't matter, right?
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about data silos. This is something that I like to talk about, and this is something that I was very interested that your product does. So I felt like on the market, a lot of products say, you have data in all these different data stores, and our product, let's come in and take your data and put it in a new bucket.
Yeah.
Where you're saying leave it where it is, and then we'll attach to it, and then we'll be able to get data from it. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we decided not to take the Dear Liza approach and basically put something in a new bucket that may have a hole as well. At the end of the day, when people are dealing with sensitive data, people data, other types of crown jewels, patents, IP, things of that sort, the last thing you want to do is necessarily move or relocate or dislocate the data. Now, there's occasions where you want to do that, but the role of somebody like BigID that provides you visibility to the data is not to copy and move the data. And part of the reason you don't want to do that is because the more copies you make of data, not only do you pay more, whether it's to capitalized infrastructure in your data center or buy the gigabyte in the cloud, you also create additional security vectors, right? There's more opportunities for bad actors in places that you're familiar with to take the data, manipulate the data, abuse the data. And so the last thing you want to do is move that. So our approach is the antithesis of that. We want to basically create centralized visibility or views into the data without centralizing the data. Keep the data decentralized. So if you put the data in Snowflake, if you put it in Databricks, if you put it in Office 365, we leave the data there, but we essentially give you a map to understand it, to navigate it. So we're kind of the opposite of creating yet another data store that you got to pay by the gigabyte or by the kind of terabyte. We basically look across Snowflake, we look across Databricks, we look across BigQuery, we look across Redshift, we look across mainframe, and we tell you what you have everywhere. We give you the power to navigate it just like you would on the road, but we don't necessarily copy it. An analogy that I would give is in the early days of Google, their aim was not to copy the internet for you to navigate it. It was to index the internet. So you could find what you needed to find, but it wasn't like you were looking in some facsimile of the internet. And so in a similar way, we're not trying to create a facsimile of your data that creates all these kind of security issues. We're trying to give you a way of navigating, a way of understanding, a way of contextualizing what data you have, wherever it is. And that's kind of a different approach that we developed and patented and all the other kind of things.
Yeah. Context is really important because I feel like humans really need to bring that context. So you can bring the visibility, but you really need someone to be able to tell you why certain things are important.
Yeah.
I really like, I don't know. I don't know what people call it. I call it myself metadata. So
Yep.
it's the other data that you can glean from all the data that you're looking at from these maps and then do tagging of different things. So things like, being able to find documents that have social security numbers. In manual days, you just assume, okay, well, HR has records that have social security numbers. But then if, those numbers or that data was in other places, it would be harder to find without technology. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of a little bit of a kind of a sing-song in terms of the way we view it. So discovery is really about content and context, right? It's about understanding what you have and a little bit about why you have it or whose it is, where it came from. So context matters. And typically in the data world, you think in terms of data discovery and metadata, right? The metadata is kind of like the surface view that provides the context. Now, here's a little secret though. Most metadata management tools don't provide you context. All they do is lazily just look at the column information and say, I found it. Well, that doesn't give you context. In fact, it gives you a misreading because the metadata was put in there by some developer and all you're doing is surfacing that. You're just basically lazily kind of grabbing it and putting it into a catalog and saying, ta-da. But it doesn't really tell you about what's underneath. In fact, it could be completely wrong, which is why they developed this notion of data stewards that are somehow supposed to be experts in technical metadata. So they can look at the catalog and just by staring at it, figure out if the metadata is correct or what it is, and basically provide that kind of human interface. So we think that while that may have been okay in 2005, 2006, we've come a long way, right? We're in the 2020s now. There's advancements in machine learning. There's advancements in scale and data science. And so our whole belief is that it's important as you kind of to build that kind of full contextual map, you need to be able to find the data, you need to be able to find the metadata, and you need to leverage machine learning by looking at your entire data state to help you interpret that. So do the curation, do the understanding, do the contextualization through machine learning. And then, where you have a steward, the steward's primary role is really about validating, not to be some oracle like in ancient Greece, where they have to be able to kind of look at this archaic catalog and make sense of it. That's not their job. They're humans, they're fallible. Their job is to provide options and then kind of use their best judgment to validate it. And so again, when we do discovery and you talk about insight, we don't just tell you, here we found this data element in this place, whether it's social security in a document, whether it's a name in a database. We find that, but we give you context around it. We give you, here's kind of like whose it is, here's why you have it, here's where it came from. We tell you all of that. And then equally important, we allow you to build additional metadata over top of that. But again, we use the machine learning to kind of recommend, the labels, the tagging, everything else you would want. And then a human could basically just validate it, as opposed to having to just kind of stare at this catalog and make something up, which is kind of the way it's being done to date.
Yeah. What one of the features of your product that I have really loved over the years is your correlation, the ability to correlate data. Can you explain to people what that is and what it means? It's something very unique to your product.
Yeah, so one of the things we realized is the need for data knowledge kind of straddles three organizations, right? So there's kind of, the way you almost think of it is there's kind of visibility, and there's three organizations that care about visibility. Privacy cares about visibility, especially when it comes to personal data. Security cares about data visibility because they're looking for your crown jewels and high-risk data so they can remediate, encrypt, tokenize, whatever that is. And data governance cares about visibility around the data because they want to be able to get more value from the data, right? They want to bring some order to the disorder. Now, as it happens, each of these three buckets take a very, very different approach to understanding data. And part of that is historical. So in the data governance world, they grew up in a village that only talks metadata. That's the language they speak. So everything is interpreted in terms of metadata, and pretty much everything in data governance is about how do I make sense of that metadata, right? Stewardship is really about making sense of that metadata. Lineage, quality, they're all predicated on this metadata. In the village on the other side of the mountain, there's the security folks. And they use a slightly different set of words and meanings to do data discovery. So they talk in terms of finding sensitive data. They talk about data classification versus metadata. So it's a different kind of animal and different kind of approach. And then over here in privacy land, they're trying to do something a little bit different as well. So they primarily care about personal data, and they not only care about what personal data do I have, social security, a health record, IP address, cookie, session key. They also care about whose it is. So they talk in terms of inventory and talk in terms of correlation because they want to be able to correlate that data back to an identity. And so what we realized is this kind of one and done approach where I just say, I'm going to do classification, or I'm going to do cataloging, or I'm going to do, this kind of inventory, doesn't work for all three organizations. So we basically built a platform that does all three. We have a full next generation metadata catalog that allows you to collect and capture and interpret technical and operational metadata. We have a data classification engine that leverages pattern matching, machine learning, like natural language processing and deep learning to make sense of where you have crown jewels. And then we have this third thing that we invented called correlation, which is a graph-based technology, so another type of machine learning that essentially automatically builds a graph to show you related and connected data. And so this way, I want to find what data do I have on Dimitri. We're able to report back, here's all the data that you have on Dimitri, even when that data is not explicitly mine, meaning I'm sitting in a house in Westchester, my wife is sitting in the same house, my kids are in the same house because of COVID, we all share a GPS coordinate, but if I'm communicating to you over the session of Zoom, that GPS instance is mine, it's not my wife's. And so we built this kind of correlation technology to show you that inventory and how that inventory is connected to an identity to solve that privacy data right problem. So we have correlation, we have classification, we have cataloging. And so we developed each of these and they work together so that now for the first time in history, in mankind, companies don't have to have one solution for the data team, another solution for security, another solution for privacy. They have a single authoritative view of their data that straddles these three worlds, because each of these worlds want to be able to deal with compliance so they don't get fined, security so they don't get fired, data so they can make money. And we do that. And correlation is kind of the view we developed for privacy. It has other use cases like master data management, reference data, et cetera. But it's a completely new technology. We patented reference data. It doesn't exist anybody else or anywhere else. That's what BigID invented. So that, again, we could find your data, we could find my data, we could find my wife's data as well. Yeah. Only 3 people. We only find data on 3 people.
On 3 people, yes. So as you've done this journey and you work with different businesses with their data, what has surprised you? Maybe the thing that you didn't anticipate that you'd find at working with companies about their data?
What is surprising? So look, I think some things didn't, right? So we started off from the get-go and decided to build a solution geared to the enterprise that has more complex needs, right? Looking at data is hard. And part of it is because you need to look inside of things and you need to make sense of when you look inside of those things. And you don't always have the benefit of starting out with any kind of presupposition. You don't have the schema. You don't have the data ontologies. You don't have anything. And so I think what continuously surprises us is that every enterprise is like a snowflake, right? They have all kinds of data stores in NetApp, in EMC, and mainframe, and in Oracle SQL, and Tableau, and in AWS, and Azure, and GCP, and Salesforce, and Workday. And connecting to all of that means you need to be able to understand how to authenticate to those systems. You need to be able to pull data from those systems efficiently and make sense of them and not keep them. You need to be able to integrate with things like password vaults. So while I don't know if it was surprising, I think to some degree it was reaffirming. I think there are companies that make statements about, oh yeah, we look across data. But the reality is data is messy, right? It's stored in a lot of places, in a lot of different formats. You need a lot of different kinds of authentications to get to it. You need to be able to manage who could see it and who could do what with it. And I think to some degree, what we've learned and been reaffirmed by kind of the large customers we have is it's messy. And the faster you get through that messiness, the faster you're able to abstract that away, the better you are. And frankly, the benefit we've had is we've raised a lot of money to invest in making the hard things easier.
Excellent. Let's talk a bit about duplication of data within organizations. So, I think it's a epidemic of duplication of data in organizations because, again, we were in this bucket thing where everyone has all these different applications. People have different uses for data. The way that people were using data, in some ways, it was easier for them to duplicate it and instead of sharing it in some ways. So I know that your product is very powerful in terms of being able to have people surface duplicates. Can you talk to me a little bit about the problem of duplication? I think you touched on it a bit about in terms of cybersecurity. We know it increases people's risk.
Yeah, there's actually 3 applications. One is privacy security, and the third is in the data governance world. So as you kind of highlighted, duplication happens naturally, right? Somebody takes a PDF or a PowerPoint and they make a copy of it. They make a slight modification. Or developers take a data set, they kind of take a snapshot of it and create a test data set that they can use for developing an application that, again, is a duplicate. So duplication happens a lot. People do an archive and they basically create a duplicate data set. Here's the problem with it. Problem 1 is in privacy, right? Technically, every time you make a copy of the data, it still belongs to that individual and you still need to be able to account for it. Problem 2, security. Every time you make a copy of it, you expand your attack surface, right? That data has sensitive information. And now there's more places where a bad actor could go and find it and potentially kind of take it, steal it, whatever that is. And it has a data governance problem, right? Data has drift, right? So you make a copy, which is the original data set, which is, which is the progenitor of the other ones. And so there's a whole kind of challenge with it. Now, on top of the data duplication problem, there's a secondary issue, which is data drift, as I mentioned, which is really a data similarity, right? You may be working on a spreadsheet. You may change some cells, and now it's no longer duplicate, but it certainly is similar. And you still want to be able to account for it. You still want to be able to understand which kind of begot what, so which was the progenitor of the other one. And so I would expand the problem of data duplication to one of duplication and similarity. And the reason there's urgency is not only does it create privacy issues, it creates security issues, it creates governance issues in terms of authoritative data sources. It also has two other impacts that are critical, that are kind of worth highlighting. One is cost, right? When you capitalized your EMC server or Oracle server and you had a data center in New Jersey, maybe cost wasn't a big deal, right? You could write off the investment that you make in a new server over the course of a year. But now with the shift to the cloud, you're paying for every gigabyte you use, right? You're a renter now. And so you want to keep that to a minimum. And again, I think the other issue it creates an issue around security and risk, and you want to be able to reduce risk. So what we developed is a type of data classification, but instead of looking for exact matches, it looks for close enough matches. It's something we call cluster analysis. We developed it for both unstructured data, i.e. documents, emails, and structured data, like databases, data warehouses, Hive, et cetera, in Hadoop. And to the best of my knowledge, no other company has this fuzzy classification. And what fuzzy classification does is it lets you more easily find duplication and similarity. So I want to know how two databases compare. We could tell you, and we could tell you the difference. And so think about all the efficiencies that gets you in terms of consolidation, in terms of risk reduction. Maybe it's not two databases. Maybe you have a giant Office 365 file folder with all kinds of stuff there, and you're paying a lot of money for every kind of file you kind of create and copy and duplicate. And you may just want to kind of label them similarly. You may want to do some house cleaning. We could do that. So again, we call it cluster analysis. It's a type of fuzzy classification. It leverages unsupervised machine learning for those of you in the audience that are familiar with that. To the best of my knowledge, nobody else offers anything like this. And we developed it to, again, it helps organizations save money because it allows you to consolidate infrastructure, reduce your data footprint. It helps you reduce risk because we tell you, where you have kind of high risk data and, which was the original document so that, again, you could kind of manifest that. And then it also helps you from a data governance standpoint because now for the first time, I have a situational awareness view of my entire data state. I want to find a similar data set for BI or AI. I could tell you where else you have a similar data set, and we could tell you the quality on that data set. So it has a lot of applications, including cost reduction, risk reduction, improved AI and BI. And again, it's something we developed over the last year and a bit in response to customer requests.
Excellent, excellent. I would love to talk about legacy data and sort of over data retention. So legacy data is a huge problem in my opinion. A lot of times people, let's say they have data from old systems that they may, put on an old server in a back room or something like that. And a lot of times that data, because it's so old, it may not have a huge business value, but in the inverse, it has a astronomical sometimes risk, especially if that data is breached. Can you tell me a little bit about how you all approach legacy data and help people work on things like data retention?
Sure, yeah. So one thing I haven't made clear about our kind of product architecture is we did something novel around data management. We kind of reimagined it. And we took kind of a playbook from folks like AWS and Salesforce and frankly, Apple. And the notion today is you don't have to do everything yourself. You could build these kind of modular functions that take advantage of your core business, which in our case is data discovery, right? Leveraging cluster analysis, correlation, classification, and catalog. That's our core business, that visibility into that data to give you that kind of discovery and insight or intelligence. But then there's other things that people want to do, like retention management, like remediation, like quality, et cetera. And so what we did is we created this abstraction layer where you could build apps or modules that essentially sit over top of that core discovery, could take the metadata, could take the data, could take the correlation or the graph, and basically tell you something about it, help you do hygiene or management of your information. And one of those apps that we developed is a data retention app. And the data retention app allows you to either import or define rules that you have around data you may want to retain, whether that's email data, file data, database data. And it essentially creates a set of workflows and operationalizations that make it easier for you to manage, both for regulated and non-regulated data, what you want to keep and what you want to archive or back up. And we implemented this or instantiated this as an app, right, which never has been done before. Because again, we're the first data management platform that is almost this kind of web service-like architecture where we allow kind of these kind of modular apps to kind of open and extend our platform. And so one of them is data retention. And again, the utility of it or the value of it is really about helping organizations that maybe need to comply with New York State DFS regulations around non-public information, or maybe they want to comply with certain GDPR requirements around personal data, or maybe they're in the healthcare industry and they're subject to HIPAA regulations around data archiving. And so this provides you a mechanism that's versatile enough to support unstructured, i.e. documents, email, images, as well as structured, i.e. data you may have like in a Snowflake or a Redshift or a database. And again, it's instantiated as an app, which is powerful because for companies that have that problem, they have this kind of a la carte choice to add this module. It's just another license key. It leverages all of our metadata discovery, all of our other data discovery. And then again, it solves this painful problem around data retention and management in a consistent way across all your data, not just your files, not just your databases, across everything.
Yeah, excellent. So tell me, what thing in privacy, whether it's personal or business, concerns you most now? Like what's on the horizon that concerns you?
Yeah, so look, I think at the end of the day, privacy is shifting a little bit, where there was, I think initially in the first wave, there was really very much kind of a fear of penalties, and fear is highly motivating, right? I don't like spiders, so I avoid spiders. Highly motivating. I don't live in a place with a lot of spiders, for instance. But there needs to be more to that, and I think privacy is kind of shifting to a point where it's really about defining a customer experience. It's about providing that trust and transparency to that customer. It's creating that loyalty, that relationship that basically says, we are going to handle your data with care. We know what data we have. We know where it is. And so I think for me, there's this kind of underlying shift, and I think we see this in some of the apps that we're building in privacy, where we're trying to make it a lot more about customer experience. For those companies that care about customer loyalty, about customer transparency, about creating a trusted relationship with their customers, we think we could make an impact there. Because again, we have visibility into the data. So it's not just doing this kind of workday or workaday kind of program of, I need to do a ROPA or I need to do a PIA to give to a legal authority. It's really about the company and the customer and about building that trusted relationship. And so I don't know if this is necessarily a fear as much as this is where I think privacy needs to go. It needs to be less about fear of fines and more about fear of churn, more about fear of not providing the best service to your customer.
Right. I've always said you can make privacy a business advantage. Instead of it being, some people think of it as a tax or a penalty, that they have to spend money on privacy. But I always try to tell people, you're a steward of the data. The data doesn't belong to you. The data belongs to a customer. So if you have their trust, that will also help you have a better customer. So more customers will want to use your product, or they feel like they can trust you.
That's right. People buy from companies they trust. And at the end of the day, if you think about kind of what happened in the early e-commerce stage, if companies implemented PCI to secure their credit cards, if they did fulfillment on without dropping orders, if they handled returns. So data is just a new frontier in that customer experience journey. And so I think we've kind of figured out how to do kind of customer support, customer fulfillment, security of credit cards, and now it's providing that trust and transparency across all personal data that customers have.
Right, right. So if it was the world according to Dimitri and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for privacy, whether it's technology, law, anywhere in the world?
Yeah, look, and I think it's really about kind of borrowing a playbook from the financial industry. And I think I used the example earlier about, the way organizations operate with your money, right? People take responsibility for it. If you deposit it, if you transact it, right? You give it to, a theater company because you're going to see a movie, or maybe an e-commerce company because you want to buy one of their products. You assume that there is an accounting of what you give them and what they collect, and then there's a corresponding kind of service, whether it's depositing an interest or whether it's a product that you get. Privacy needs to follow that, right? Privacy at the end of the day is about trust and transparency in the data, and privacy cannot just be a GRC type service where this kind of priesthood of lawyers are basically producing work products for regulators. That's missing the point. The real point is about providing power to the people, and privacy is a mechanism to provide power to the people around the data that they are loaning you, that they are granting you in exchange for something.
Right. I agree. And I think because privacy touches humans, it has to include all humans. So it can't just be an ivory tower exercise.
Yeah, no, we're in agreement.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a great session. I'm, again, so thrilled to see your success and the things you guys are doing. And I love the way that you're thinking about data and these data problems in those areas of governance, security, and privacy.
Well, thank you very much again for having me.
Bye-bye. Talk to you soon.
Bye.